church. Can you just talk about that for us?
Yeah, sure. So I think my mum's whole life revolved around her having ME and, having rests every afternoon and going to the ME group, like I say, and that was really her identity. I was very much secondary to that. And, all the attention was on the ME, and I was expected as well to kind of pander to that and look after her. And, it would be, what are we doing this weekend? What do you need me to do? As opposed to like the other way around, which is kind of a more normal parent-child relationship.
And you even quoted that she even stated once that you made her condition worse. How do you think that affected you as a young child? To hear that from a mother or a parent.
Yeah, I mean, she blamed me for getting the ME in various different ways, and I think obviously that massively impacts how you feel about yourself. I really felt like I was a failure, like I couldn't do anything right, and that I had made her life bad. I had self-esteem issues. I really hated myself. I self-harmed. I had a suicide attempt, and yeah, I really hated myself. And I guess I was really lucky in that I was able to go off to university and kind of escape that environment. And although that was a really difficult time for me, sort of separating from my family, I think really looking back, if that hadn't have happened, I don't know where I'd be now. If I hadn't have met my husband at university, I'm not really sure what would have happened to me. Yeah.
And how did, if she knew about it, how did your mother react to, the issues that you had, perhaps suicide attempt, self-harm? Was she aware of that?
I mean, I imagine she was. Being a parent myself now, I would be surprised if she didn't realise I was going off to my room and crying every night. I'd be surprised if she didn't know I was getting knives and cutting myself, but she didn't appear to know anything. Wow. She didn't say anything to me or anything like that. I'm not sure about the suicide attempt. She did find out when I was a bit older, when I was in my 20s. I told her, and her reaction was, for goodness sake, don't tell your dad.
Wow.
And so it was very much like...
And there's another one. We actually watched your other interview, so I'm going to quote it from it. You said that you don't resent your mother, or you don't have much resent towards her. So if you don't, or if you do, how did you overcome it, and have you overcame it?
I don't know. I want to use the word resent. Maybe I don't feel very much anger towards her.
Yep.
And part of that is a reaction because it's such an unnatural emotion for me to feel towards my mum. I think the idea of forgiveness is quite a hard one. I'm a Christian, and so I believe in forgiveness, but I believe it's this kind of ongoing daily choice.
Yes.
And it's much more about releasing myself from her and from what happened than about saying it's okay, because it wasn't okay. No. And it will never be okay. So I struggle saying I don't resent her. I guess I struggle with that, but I try to forgive her. And ongoing, know whether to or not. And the first person I spoke to was my friend Julia, and she is amazingly supportive and wonderful, but her reaction was, throw them away, they are going to be devastating, and she wasn't wrong, but they also illuminated like what had happened and gave me a lot of answers. It was when I actually started writing my book that I decided I really need to read these to get a fuller picture. So yeah.
What was your emotions while reading these diaries?
It was really weird because they're quite unemotional, and they've got a lot of information about really boring things, like about the weather or whether she went shopping that day. And so it would be sort of months and months of trawling through these daily diaries of, it was raining today and I needed my umbrella, or I forgot my umbrella, or whatever. And then suddenly there would be this, I broke Helen's arm, or, I drugged Helen, and it would be that blatant. And so that was really hard because it would be a lot of boring information and then an enormous shock and something I didn't know had happened. I mean, I hate to use the word, but it was a real roller coaster. There was no way I could have searched for that. It just wasn't. And I think as well, it was a process of coming to terms with what had happened, slowly understanding that my mum was probably not normal and that this situation wasn't wasn't her being ill, it was Munchausen's. And then understanding what that was and what might have caused it. It was a whole thing that really unravelled after she died completely. Yeah.
How did you feel when you realised what was wrong with your mum?
I guess it was lots of stages.
Yeah.
So the biggest one for me was realising that she had faked the ME, because that had been such a huge part of my childhood, and not just you know, at the time, but also the choices I'd made for my future had always been based around what my mum needed. And it felt like the world had been turned upside down. Literally, I felt like I couldn't. I think it's hard to explain gaslighting because it sounds so stupid. Like, why on earth would you believe something that you can see is untrue? And yet there's such power in it. And yeah, so there were moments when I thought, well, that's not true. And I knew that, I suppose I would have said she was possibly exaggerating.
Yeah.
And it's only when you put it all together that you're like, oh yeah, it's so obvious when you know. But I think you don't go into relationships expecting people to fake an illness. So if you're invested in them, you're not going to call them up on it, because what an awful friend or relative you'd be. Yeah, so it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Sorry, can I just interject?
And yeah, I think it would have been much harder had I not have had children.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So you feel like your children kind of saved you in a way.
Oh,
pulled you
massively.
out.
Yeah, totally. I think they open my eyes. I think when you become a parent, you do have a different perspective on your own childhood, whether it was good or bad. You know, there's things that you reassess and think, do I want to do that? And for me, it was a moment of going, oh my goodness, I would never do that to my children. So, you know, yeah, it was really revelation.
Do you know what? That's a really respectable thing, because I think generational trauma is a massive thing, and you know, as parents, you know, we often repeat the patterns of our guardians. So I think that's really interesting. You know, how you've chosen to come out of that and go and take a different approach completely. Really admirable.
I think people who've been through childhood abuse
Your new book.
Oh yes.
Yes. What are we going to see?
As readers.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a few ideas in the pipeline. So I'm looking at doing sort of something, a suspense novel, a thriller, something like that.
Awesome.
But I'm also really interested in historical novels, and so I'm kind of looking that way as well. That's the sort of thing I've written before, but hasn't been published.
Right.
So yeah, it's all open at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Got any more questions?
No.